Ancient Egypt gave the Bible, just as it gave to so much of the ancient world, a special sense of rite and ritual, of holiness and deity. "3,300 years ago, one of the greatest cities in the world stood just over these fields here. Just where that road is, there's a little canal. In ancient times, it was one of the main branches of the Nile. And down it came ships from Cyprus, from Syria, from Crete, all over the Mediterranean, bringing goods, foreign, rare, wonderful things, into the courts of the pharaohs that stood here. Of course, by the canals stood the warehouses. Behind the warehouses, the offices of administration, and then the royal palaces, and then the temples, with clouds of incense going up into the air. Like this town's gone, straight up into the air. But look at this. Aren't they extraordinary? It's a very old pair of feet left in a field. They're about 8 or 10 times bigger than our feet, so the statue must have stood 50, 60 feet high. And then, of course, on top of that, you have a great crown and the pedestal underneath. It must have been a massive statue dragged here from the limestone cliffs of Upper Egypt. And down here in front, it's the name of the man in whose honor the statue was brought here. Usamatra Meriamun, Ramesses II, beloved of the gods. And he called his city Ramesses after him. And this city, the Bible tells us then, was the city of the Exodus. Exodus is simply the Greek word for going out. And of course, the Exodus is the going out of the children of Israel from Egypt to wander in the wilderness for 40 years and then come into their promised land in Israel, the Israelites. Now, Egyptian records tell us that there were already Israelites in their promised land in a particular date. It's a precious record, the only one from ancient Egypt, but there it is, and the date is 1207. At that time, the children of Israel were already in their promised land, according to the ancient Egyptian texts. So, they wandered, as the Bible tells us, for 40 years in the wilderness. They must have started from here, from Ramesses, not later than 1247 BC. That's a pretty precise date, because that is exactly the time when Ramesses was on the throne. And if we take back history a little further, we can see there's about a 30-year period when the Exodus could have occurred in the time of Ramesses. Sounds amazingly precise, doesn't it? But there's one problem. Unlike Tel el-Dabba, it's the old city under its ash, unlike the palaces here, unlike Ramesses' statue, you can't actually find any archaeological evidence that the Exodus ever took place. In a country where thousands upon thousands of documents have survived, that is very extraordinary. There's not a hint of Israel in Egypt in the ancient texts, nor of the biblical Exodus. In fact, the Exodus never took place in history as the Bible describes it. But then, of course, the truth of the Exodus story, like all truths in the ancient world, is not the sort of truth
you'll find in history books.
In the 19th century, lots of English vicars used to come to the Sinai Desert to escape the English winter and to look for Moses and the traces of the Exodus. Most of them were only here a few days, of course, before they discovered there was just no way that 600,000 people could survive in this wilderness. There are other problems too. In a place where you can find traces of Bedouin encampments, just 2 or 3 people who stayed one night thousands of years ago, there was no trace of these 600,000 people. And that's the biggest number of people that have ever been here, apart from the 2 armies in the recent wars. Then there's another problem, the ancient Egyptian records. There's no record of the quarter of the population of the country ever getting up and leaving, either. Oh, well, say the experts, that's because ancient people generally get the numbers wrong. Let's fine it down. Instead of 600,000, let's call it 5,000. And let's say that the miraculous parting of the Red Sea was actually caused by a volcanic explosion that somehow created this enormous tidal wave, and on you go with these explanations. What you end up doing, of course, is translating a marvellous, miraculous event into a banal Bedouin trot through the desert with a few guys wandering around. Of course, the story is not about a documentary about people leaving Egypt. The story is about the birth of a new God and the birth of a new nation. But strangely enough, it's told in the old ways of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. That is, on the great wave of a myth.
The Exodus story is a remake of some of the East's most ancient tales. That is how the book of Genesis tells us all its most important things. Ancient Israel knew nothing about science or history books, but it did know the old creation stories, and what, therefore, the creation of ancient Israel must have been like. And that's exactly what the Exodus story is, a creation story. The very name of Moses is the Egyptian word for birth. With the parting of the waters of the Red Sea, Israel was born again, just as the world had been made at the time of the creation. And that is the truth of this extraordinary saga.
You know, if you want to, you can explain the whole beautiful story of the Exodus in terms of a volcanic explosion. You can say, for example, that the parting of the Red Sea was due to the after effects of a tidal wave. You can say that Jehovah, appearing in a column of fire, was the glowing ash of the volcano in the night sky. There was a volcanic explosion like that too, about 1450 BC. But the miraculous thing about that is that not one ancient scribe of that time ever saw fit to write about it. It's not that surprising, actually, because ancient scribes in that time didn't write about things like that. They didn't think they were important enough. So, if that story really is behind the Exodus, what you can say is then that only Moses himself saw God in that cloud and that explosion. And that perception of God, that new understanding, that new awareness of what a God was far more thunderous than any volcanic explosion. Just think about this new God. Just think about Jehovah for a moment. Jehovah travelled with Moses and his people from Egypt to the Promised Land. He wandered with them for 40 years in the wilderness. This Jehovah, then, is a God that moves through space and through time. And that makes him the most revolutionary God that there ever was, that anybody ever saw. Look, the gods of Egypt and Mesopotamia were usually gods of place. They usually stayed in one place. They were gods of the washing or the fields or the rivers or the skies or the mountains or the towns or something like that. They were gods of place, and they were often in families. And as far as time went, they were usually gods of cycles. They were gods of the sun going over every day, or gods of the river flooding every year, or the moon, or things like that. And men moved in those rhythms
Jehovah's not like that, though. He moves through time, with time. Time is now a linear thing like a river, and Jehovah and his people are moving along together. That makes it not only a new idea for God, but a new idea for man and what man can be. And that's the fantastic thing about this God. It actually gives man a new potential. Now he can develop, not over the course of a year and through one harvest, but through centuries, and he can do a deal with God. This amazing, moral, abstract, theological thing, that if he does the right thing, he will get better and better and better as the millennia go by. What an extraordinary new God then. So, think of the Bible now. Think of the gods of Mesopotamia that have given the book of Genesis its universe, its order, its stage on which all the rest of the Bible is set. And the gods of Egypt, who gave, really, I suppose they gave Jehovah something of his power and majesty, something of that secret quality. But it's only this new God of space and time, which is in Israel. And that's the God that is still with us and our civilization today.